For the debate, I recognize the member from Whitby, Oshawa.
Thank you, Speaker, and good morning. As the official opposition critic for advanced education and skills development, I appreciate the opportunity to rise in the Legislature once again to address Bill 7, the Protecting Students Act, starting with the government's time allocation motion. Speaker, what's clear is that Bill 37 is an extremely important piece of legislation affecting the future leaders of our great province. And teachers like my daughter, who each day play a significant and important role in molding the minds of young men and young women. Speaker, earlier in this week, I stood in the Legislature and discussed the government's lack of a substantive, coherent, and focused agenda. Speaker, the government will be moving time allocation, as they've done, on a bill that they've introduced 3 times here in the Legislature. Speaker, 3 times. They're moving time allocation on a bill that they've had plenty of time to pass and demonstrate their commitment to the principles of the proposed legislation as a priority. And when they finally do bring the bill forward for debate, Speaker, they limit that debate. They limit the debate and the amount of time elected representatives of this legislature have to discuss it. Speaker, the people of Ontario sent us here to do a job. They sent us here to be their voices on legislation that affect their families and their livelihoods. Speaker, when in opposition, the Chief Government Whip and the Member of Provincial Parliament of St. Catharines, based on his years of experience, which I greatly respect, summed up the way governments use time allocation by saying, what you have with this time allocation motion, with this closure motion, is that a government that every day it comes into this House gets worse in the way it deals with the democratic process. The democratic process. Speaker, I could not agree more with the Chief Government Whip's opinion, based on his years of experience and sterling career here in the Legislature. Because it's an apt way to describe his government's approach to the business of this legislature, and indeed, Speaker, their view of the democratic process. I think my colleague, the member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, said it best when describing the Premier and her government. They have long since forgotten and do not care about what is right for the people of Ontario. They have long since tossed that right under the bus. They don't care about what is right or good for Ontario anymore. Speaker, they're in the 3rd quarter of the football game and they're trailing. They're now trying to come up with some kind of strategy to try to somehow pull this one out of the fire. Speaker, since the Lesage report was released in 2012, this government has had 3 different education ministers. And in that period, there's been no movement on this file until now. Let me repeat. 4 years have gone by, and the government has done little on this file. But, Speaker, this government wants you to know that this legislation is a priority for them. But 4 years have gone by. In fact, it's such a priority that the Associate Minister of Education and Member of Provincial Parliament for Halton spent a majority of her time during the debate of this bill earlier this week talking about the government's other priorities and not about, substantively, Bill 37 at all. The government prorogued the House in a hurry this past September, killing all the legislation before this legislature, including Bill 37, which was named at that time, Speaker, Bill 200. But why? Why, Speaker? Well, Speaker, so they could reintroduce all the bills that were sitting on the order paper and start counting again from 0. This government stopped the process of several important bills affecting hard-working Ontario families by proroguing the Legislature to offer Ontarians in a too little, too late attempt at changing the conversation from their failed record. And otherwise, this government has reintroduced the old bills that were on the order paper during the last session, and they've called it, Speaker, a grand new direction. Speaker, given the number of times this government moves time allocation, I know they don't hold the opposition's opinion in high regard. And by association, Speaker, the thousands of people that the opposition members represent. Speaker, let's turn back to the content of Bill 37. It's my understanding that the Ontario College of Teachers welcomes these changes, the proposed changes. Greater transparency in investigation and disciplinary matters, faster complaint resolution, and, Speaker, making the complaint process more accessible to the public. The college's registrar, Michael Savantori, said, "We're committed to ensuring that our teachers are supporting the success and achievement of our students. And that is why we've been working with the government to strengthen the disciplinary processes at the college. In the rare cases where discipline is required, teachers, parents, and students will know that a fair and transparent process will be in place." Speaker, I'm sure you would agree that the public needs to know that a process is in place that will create prompt reaction and resolution. They don't want to be kept in the dark. It's a reasonable expectation, isn't it? Late last month, Speaker, City TV ran a piece on their news channel in which they asked the government whatever became of this legislation, Bill 37, and before that, Bill 200, and whether they had any intention of ever passing it. The Minister of Education, while ignoring the questions of why this bill hasn't moved anywhere, said that the bill was a priority for them. And then, of course, a week later, brought forward their bill for the third time. For the third time, stating it was a priority for them. They tried to seize a moment with a speech from the throne, but it's a moment that's already come and gone, Speaker. It's come and gone. That being said, Speaker, we are supportive of the proposed legislation that's reflected in Bill 37, the Protecting Students Act, a bill which I believe is much needed, and while it can be improved, and we will take that opportunity, Speaker, to bring forward amendments during its time at committee, and I look forward to being at committee as the official opposition critic for advanced education and skills development. It addresses in large part the outstanding recommendations from the Lesage report released in 2012. Speaker, when this bill was first introduced in 2013 as Bill 103, the Ontario Progressive Conservative Caucus did not feel it went far enough, and we still have that opinion. At that time, my caucus offered support for the bill as a good first step, though we certainly felt there were elements missing from the bill that needed to be entrenched in the legislation. Now, however, we're pleased, to a degree, to see that Bill 37 will ensure a teacher's certificate is automatically revoked if he or she has been found guilty of certain forms of sexual abuse or acts, Speaker, related to child pornography. Speaker, sexual abuse and exploitation of children are unacceptable crimes on one of the most vulnerable populations in our society, and there should be zero tolerance for these types of acts. There's no place, Speaker, for child exploitation in this province or any part of society for that matter, and we expect all individuals, regardless of profession, who engage in this behaviour to be brought to justice. And I would also like to highlight a few other key provisions within the legislation that helps strengthen the current educational system. The bill will require employers to inform the college, the Ontario Teachers College, when they have restricted a teacher's duties or dismissed him or her for misconduct. Further, it will allow the college to share information with the school board if the subject of the complaint is subject to an interim restriction or suspension because he or she poses an immediate risk to a child or student. Speaker, these amendments to the current regulations will help make it easier for the Ontario College of Teachers and school boards, for that matter, to work together to ensure the safety of our children in our schools. The bill also sets clear rules for dispute resolution and improves timelines for the investigation and consideration of complaints. Speaker, this is a much-needed update to a process that at the moment is confusing and lacks transparency and accountability. In addition, the bill would improve the investigation and disciplinary processes of the College of Early Childhood Educators by establishing limitations on when and how often a member of the college can apply to have terms, conditions, or limitations varied or removed from his or her certificate. These are much-needed steps, Speaker, and legislative directions which we, as a caucus and the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, support. That being said, Speaker, there are still areas where this bill can be improved. My colleague, the member for Alderman Norfolk, in his speech during debate of this bill, put forward an interesting possible amendment, Speaker, that I'd like to share with the members here in the Legislature, including yourself. When noting that the original proposed legislation is being amended to require a hearing if an offender wishes to work with children again, the member for Alderman Norfolk proposed that the school board that will end up listening and making decisions on these hearings should be made up of subject matter experts on sexual abuse and child pornography to ensure, Speaker, that these decisions are being taken in a manner that is in the best interests of the student. Speaker, a number of members of the Legislature have also pointed out during debate of Bill 37 that we need to make sure that within the proposed legislation there are safeguards for teachers and early childhood educators who are falsely accused. We need to make sure that this legislation protects all concerned in the process, and this aspect is something that we will examine and discuss further when this legislation arrives in the Standing Committee. Speaker, as I said earlier this week, and I believe it bears repeating, I want to stress that the overwhelming majority of teachers are there to excel, including my daughter, to teach our next generation of leaders and assure that they're on the path to success, a path to success and succeed. Speaker, teachers are entrusted to shape and mold the minds of tomorrow. They're called upon to go on above and beyond for our children every day, every month, every year. So while this legislation, embodied in Bill 37, is most certainly aimed at a very small portion of the profession, it is no doubt, there's no doubt in my mind, that it's a necessary piece of legislation in order to ensure that we're making and doing what is necessary to protect and mold our next generation. Speaker, while the government has brought down, once again, the guillotine known as time allocation to stifle and limit debate, we will continue our diligence to monitor and evaluate this bill as it moves from the Legislature into Standing Committee and clause by clause, and propose amendments, Speaker, propose amendments where we feel that this bill can be strengthened and help the youth of our province to succeed in the way that they deserve. Thank you, Speaker.